Have you ever stopped to really think about where money comes from? I mean, really think about it. Most of us have this neat little story in our heads about how it all got started. Well, today, we're diving into a book that basically takes a stick of dynamite to that entire story. Anthropologist David Graeber's Debt, The First 5,000 Years. It's a fascinating and pretty controversial look at how a story we all think we know might be completely upside down.
Yeah, you know this one, right? It's the story they teach in Econ 101. It all starts with barter. You know, a farmer needs a new axe, a blacksmith wants some chickens, so they swap. Simple. But this gets kind of clumsy after a while. So to make things easier, everyone agrees on a universal thing to trade: money. And then way down the line, we get sophisticated and invent these complex systems of lending and borrowing, what we call credit. It just seems to make perfect sense. It's logical, it's clean, it feels inevitable.
And this is the massive question right at the heart of David Graeber's book. What if that entire story, the very foundation of how we think about our economy, is just a fairy tale? What if the real history of money is the exact opposite of what we've all been told? Okay, so let's start at the beginning, or what we thought was the beginning. Barter. Graeber comes right out of the gate with a pretty bold claim. He says that the whole idea of a barter economy, this age where everyone was just swapping chickens for pots, is a complete fantasy. It's an invention of economists that has pretty much zero basis in how human societies ever actually worked. So look at this. On the left, you've got the textbook theory we all learned. Barter, then money, then credit. But Graeber just flips that completely on its head. He says the anthropological evidence, what we see when we actually study human communities, shows that we started with credit and debt, these complex social webs of who owed what to whom. Physical money, that shows up much later. And barter, that comes in dead last. It was something people did, but mostly with strangers, not within their own communities.
And here's the real bombshell. For a story that's supposed to be the bedrock of modern economics, there's no evidence for it. None. Not a single documented case. Anthropologists have never found a village, never observed a society where the main economic engine was people haggling and swapping goods. That whole problem of the double coincidence of wants, I need to find someone who not only has what I want, but also wants what I have, it just wasn't the main problem people in small communities were trying to solve.
And get this, it even shows up in the way we talk. For a long time, the words truck and barter didn't just mean to trade. They literally meant something closer to swindle, bamboozle, or rip-off, which tells you a lot, right? Barter wasn't for friendly exchanges with your neighbor. It was what you did with people you didn't trust and probably weren't ever going to see again. Strangers, enemies even. That's hardly a solid foundation to build a society on.
So, okay, if it wasn't barter, then what was it? How did people actually manage their economic life before cash? Well, Graeber argues the answer is something way more complex and, a lot more human.
So try to forget about a marketplace for a second. Instead, picture a social network. Let's say your neighbor's roof is leaking. You go over and help him patch it. You don't hand him a bill for your time. You just help. But now, he kind of owes you one. It's not written down, there's no interest rate, but you both know it's there. This informal, constantly shifting social ledger of favors and obligations, that's what Graeber calls a human economy. Everyone was basically a lender and a borrower all the time.
Now, to explain the foundation of this, Graeber uses a term that might make you jump a little: baseline communism. And look, he is not talking about the Soviet Union here. He's talking about a fundamental principle of social life. If someone comes up to you and asks for directions, you just give them directions. You don't ask, okay, what's in it for me? That basic assumption of mutual aid in small ways is, he argues, the starting point for all human society.
Graeber says these human economies are always a mix of three different moral principles, all jumbled together. First, you've got that baseline communism, helping someone just because they need help. Then you've got exchange, that's the more tit-for-tat stuff, where you expect something of equal value back. And finally, there's hierarchy. These are the kinds of debts based on who you are, like the debt a subject owes a king, or that unpayable debt a child might feel they owe to their parents. Real life, he says, is just a messy, constant negotiation between these three.
Okay, so this leads to a massive question. If societies ran just fine for thousands of years on these complicated social credit systems, why on earth did we invent cold, hard cash? If it wasn't to make buying chickens easier, what was it for? Well, according to Graeber, the answer has a lot less to do with markets and a lot more to do with violence.
Seriously, just think about it for a second. If you and everyone in your village already have a pretty good system for keeping track of who owes who what problem does a little piece of stamped metal actually solve? It doesn't really help you deal with the people you know and trust. So who is it for?
And this is where the historical record gets really interesting. During this period that historians call the Axial Age, you see three huge things pop up at roughly the same time. You get the very first coins, you get the rise of massive professional armies, and you get the birth of the great world religions and philosophies. Graeber looks at this and says, that is no coincidence. He argues they're all connected.
So here it is. Graeber's big theory is that money wasn't invented for local markets, it was invented by states to fund wars. Picture this. You've got an army full of professional soldiers, mercenaries, camping outside a village in a foreign land. These guys are armed, they're not from around here, and they might be dead next week. You are not going to sell them a loaf of bread on credit, right? They are the worst credit risk imaginable. So, to solve this problem, states started minting coins to pay their soldiers. But then they did something clever. They demanded that everyone in the kingdom pay their taxes in those exact same coins. All of a sudden, everyone, farmers, merchants, you name it, had to scramble to get their hands on coins. And just like that, you have the creation of markets, not for convenience, but out of necessity.
So this, let's call it messy, violent history of money, it really forces us to take a hard look at one of our most deeply held moral beliefs, the simple idea that a debt is sacred, that, of course, one must always pay one's debts. This quote from the book's opening really says it all. It captures an intuition that feels completely self-evident, right? It's a basic principle of fairness. But Graeber says, hold on. When you actually look at how debt has been used throughout history, that simple morality starts to look, well, it starts to look pretty horrifying.
And he gives some really stark examples. In colonial Madagascar, France conquered the island and then imposed a tax on the local people to pay for the cost of being conquered. Is that a legitimate debt they had to repay? In the Himalayas, a father takes out a loan for a wedding, and the moneylender takes his daughter as collateral, forcing her to work as a prostitute to pay it off. Is that a moral debt? Heck, even today in the US, people can be thrown in jail for not being able to pay a simple civil debt. These examples force you to ask, at what point does paying your debts just become an excuse for violence and domination?
He even tells this old vaudeville joke to show how absurd the logic of debt can become. So, a guy is getting mugged, right? And in the middle of the stick-up, he tries to repay a $5 loan to his friend who's with him. The robber is so offended by this personal transaction that he imposes his own logic. He pulls his gun and says, no, you lend him $100. And when the friend does, the robber just takes the $100 himself. It's a dark little joke, but it shows how the concept of debt can be completely stripped of its humanity and turned into a pure expression of power.
So, where does all of this leave us? I mean, if the story of money is wrong, and the morality of debt is not so simple, what's the big takeaway here? Graeber suggests that maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong questions this whole time.
The real danger, Graeber warns, is when we forget that a debt is really just a promise between two people. When we strip away all the human context, the history, the power dynamics, the real-life story, and pretend it's all just a sterile mathematical equation on a spreadsheet, well, that's when truly monstrous things can happen. A debt is always a social relationship, and any promise, he argues, can and sometimes must be renegotiated, especially if it becomes destructive.
And that's the powerful final question the book really leaves us with. It reframes the whole conversation. Instead of just asking, should debts be paid, yes or no, it forces us to look deeper at the human relationships behind the numbers, a child's obligation to a parent, a citizen's duty to their country, a poor nation's debt to a wealthy one. You can't understand any of those with a simple calculator. Asking who really owes what to whom, well, that's the start of a much harder and much more important conversation.